Silenced by History, Weingartner's Kain and Abel, Its Conception, Neglect, and Return to the Stage. Written by Daniel Cohen and read by ChatGPT. A short introduction to this audio version. This recording is read by ChatGPT. Any minor inconsistencies or mispronunciations of names, such as Cheryl Studer, Hans Drouans, or Le Figaro, may, I hope, be forgiven as a small counterbalance to my own unmistakable foreign accent. I hope you enjoy this first chapter. Chapter 1. Silence, Neglect, and Return. Kain and Abel, a return to the stage. During the long months of lockdown, when the pandemic ground the world to a halt and the familiar rhythms of rehearsal and performance dissolved, I found myself in possession of something rare: enforced stillness. Like many musicians, I struggled to accept it. Energy without outlet seeks other channels, and mine turned instinctively toward digging, not in the garden, though that too, but into history. Since my appointment as general music director in Darmstadt, I had become increasingly aware that the city and its theater carried a cultural past even richer than one might at first suspect. Darmstadt's role in the post-war avant-garde, the Ferienkurse, Boulez, Stockhausen, is common knowledge. As a former student and assistant of Pierre Boulez, I hardly needed reminding of that. But I wanted to know what lay beneath that layer of history, the earlier strata, the forgotten sediment. The City Library Archive proved irresistible, a place where time is stored in boxes and releases itself without order. Manuscripts, letters, programs, marginalia. Telemann in the flesh, his original manuscripts laid before me on the desk, the ink still alive on the page. And almost in the same breath, the names of singers who would later shape this very stage. Christa Ludwig, Siegfried Jerusalem, Barbara Bonney, Cheryl Studer. Then came Berlioz, Wagner, Strauss, Stravinsky, conducting in Darmstadt as if passing through a single continuous present. Paganini giving a recital in the Schloss, a long-lost Vivaldi opera resurfacing, fragments from every direction, every century, colliding at once. And then, almost casually, I came upon a list of my predecessors in the position of general music director. Hans Drouans, Karl Bohm, Hans Schmidt-Iserstedt, Erich Kleiber, Felix von Weingartner, Weingartner. The name struck with a peculiar force. I hadn't thought of it in years, not since my student days, and yet it returned immediately, vividly. The Beethoven symphonies, the first complete cycle ever recorded, which I listened to obsessively while driving my father's old Honda Civic from Netanya to the Music Academy in Tel Aviv. The conducting treatises my teacher had insisted we read, texts I barely understood then, but would later come to recognize as astonishingly clear-eyed. Weingartner had been here? In Darmstadt? The search intensified. Articles led to footnotes, footnotes to program fragments, information thinned quickly, until one small mention surfaced, an opera written by Weingartner and premiered in Darmstadt as part of his inaugural season as general music director, Kain and Abel. With the help of the theater's orchestral office and library, I eventually located a rare copy of the full score. Opening it was a shock. Truly good scores have a physical presence. They announce themselves before a note is sounded. This one did so immediately. The realization followed almost at once. No living person had heard this music. More than a century had passed since its last performance. In that moment, the decision was already made, to do everything in my power to bring Kain and Abel back to life. To my delight, the management of the Staatstheater caught the same excitement almost instantly. Only later did it become clear how much first had to be rebuilt. Not only resources and schedules, but the very resilience of the theater itself. It would take 6 seasons before we were in a position to put this plan into motion. Only then did the deeper irony of the work's history come into focus. 6 seasons of waiting were required before our plan could mature. Yet 112 years had already passed since the work itself vanished from the stage. Kain and Abel had not disappeared because it failed. On the contrary, when it was premiered in 1914, it was greeted as a major achievement. The event was a gala. The reviews were enthusiastic, often brilliant. The opera was quickly taken up by the Vienna State Opera, the German theater in Prague, and numerous houses across Germany. Concerted plans were already underway for Felix Weingartner himself to conduct the work internationally. Brussels invited him to lead performances at La Monnaie. In Paris, Le Figaro devoted an entire page to the opera, including musical examples, and began preparations for a French translation. Boston placed the work on its forthcoming repertoire. Weingartner believed, with good reason, that he had entered the international sphere not only as a conductor, but as a composer of large dramatic vision. Then history intervened, violently. The assassination in Sarajevo arrived like distant thunder. Diplomacy stalled, hope flickered, and then Europe collapsed. Borders closed, mail was censored. The Darmstadt Court Theater announced it would not open. International engagements vanished overnight. On the very day the first pages of the French translation of Kain and Abel arrived, the war had already rendered them obsolete. What followed was not a decline, it was an erasure. And yet, war alone does not account for a century of silence. Other works interrupted by 1914 eventually returned. This one did not. The reasons accumulate slowly, like clues in a long investigation. After the war, operatic taste shifted sharply. Myth without irony became suspect. Earnest metaphysical drama yielded to fragmentation, distance, and stylistic rupture. Kain and Abel, Wagnerian in scale, yet ethically corrosive and unresolved, fit nowhere comfortably. Too dark for conservative repertory, too sincere for modernist skepticism. Weingartner himself became part of the problem. His towering reputation as a conductor eclipsed his identity as a composer. His works lacked advocates, disciples, institutional heirs. When the opera vanished, no one insisted on its return. It is therefore a particular privilege, and a deeply humbling one, to have been able to act as the advocate this work required, to restore it to the stage, and to do so in the very theater for which it was written, with the orchestra for which it was conceived. And besides, among the Generalmusikdirektoren of the Staatstheater Darmstadt, we do tend to look after each other. Now, 112 years after history silenced it, Kain and Abel returns to the stage. I do not believe this performance marks the end of its story. I hope it marks only a middle chapter. Some works wait not for rediscovery, but for a time willing to listen. Daniel Cohen, Darmstadt, January 2026.